I remember that night like it branded itself straight into my memory with a hot iron. Some evenings drift away with time, slipping into that soft place where old moments go to sleep. But this one, no. This one didn't fade, didn't blur, didn't soften around the edges. It stayed sharp. Sharp like a piece of... You can disrespect me. You can talk circles around me. You can even think I'm slow or soft or too old to matter anymore. But you raise a hand to my daughter, then the quiet, church-going version of Evie steps aside. And the version folks whisper about, the one from back when I worked the emergency ward and knew exactly what damage a human body could take. Well, she comes right back out. That night, I was sitting along oak dining table in my daughter's house, a place she and her husband had fixed up just a couple years back. The dinner smelled like rosemary chicken, mashed potatoes, and the kind of forced politeness that fills the air when people try too hard to act like a family. My daughter, Lena, kept glancing at me like she wanted to say something, but her eyes darted away every time her husband turned his head. I noticed across from us sat her husband, Earl Weston, a man who always walked like somebody owed him applause just for existing. Big shoulders, loud voice, the kind of smile that felt like it was borrowed from someone nicer and didn't quite fit his face right. I had never trusted him, not from the first handshake. Something in his eyes told me he wanted control more than he wanted love. And then there was his mother, Janice, sitting at the far end of the table with her pearls. Her stiff posture and the attitude of a woman who thought she wrote the rule book for how other folks should live. The conversation was stiff, pauses too long, laughter too quick and brittle. I knew something was off. I just didn't know how off until the moment it all broke open. It happened so fast, I barely registered the movement at first. 1 second, Lena was passing the bowl of potatoes, her hands trembling just a little, her voice small as she whispered, "Here." And the next second, Earl's hand snapped across her cheek so hard the sound cracked through the room like a damn gunshot. I froze for half a second, not because I was scared, no, because my mind needed that half second to separate what I'd just seen from what I wished I'd imagined. Then he did it again and again. 3 times, 3 sickening, echoing slaps that turned her face red and made her eyes go wide and wet like a startled deer. But what made my blood run cold wasn't just the blows. It was the sound that came afterward. His mother's hands clapping, slow, delighted, proud. "That's how she learns," Janice said, lifting her chin like she'd just watched her son win a prize at a county fair. And my daughter, my baby girl, didn't even lift a hand to defend herself. She just whispered, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry," over and over, like the words were a shield that had long since stopped working. I didn't shout. I didn't gasp. I didn't fling the table aside like in those dramatic movies folks like to watch on weekends. I didn't cry either. All my tears dried up the day I buried my husband, and I hadn't wasted any since. Instead, I pushed my chair back, real slow. The legs scraped the hardwood floor with a sound that sliced through the pretending, through the tension, through every mask in that room. I stood up, my palms steady, my breath even. Earl turned to look at me like he expected me to sit down and stay quiet, the way women like Janice probably taught him other women should. He had no clue, no earthly idea who he was dealing with. I reached for my purse, calm, controlled. My fingers found my phone, and I made one call, just one. Not to the police, not to a friend, and definitely not to anyone who'd let this slide or try to talk me down. No, I called the one person who knew exactly what I was capable of and exactly how far I'd go for my daughter. And bless their ignorant hearts, Earl and his mama had no idea their little show at dinner had just lit a fire under the wrong woman. They didn't know me, not really, but they were about to. I didn't rush out of that house. I walked, slow, steady, like every step was counting down to something they couldn't see coming yet. The cool night air hit my face the moment I stepped onto the porch, but it didn't calm me, didn't soothe me, didn't wash off the sight of Lena's cheek turning red under a man she trusted. The quiet click of the door behind me felt like the world shutting its eyes for a second, just long enough for me to gather myself. I stood at the bottom of the steps, the porch light humming above me, and stared at my phone. My hand wasn't shaking. Funny thing, anger. It doesn't always come loud or messy. Sometimes it comes cold, precise, focused like a scalpel. I dialed a number I hadn't used in almost 8 years. It rang twice. Then a voice answered, deep, calm, and carrying the same weight it always had. Evie, hadn't heard from you in a long while. I know, I said. Didn't think I'd need you again. He didn't ask why I was calling. Didn't ask what happened. He just let a moment pass, then said, You want me to come? I swallowed. Yes. Another pause. Footsteps in the background. A door closing. The tone in his voice changing into something clipped and ready. On my way. I ended the call without another word. I didn't need to say anything else. He understood. I took a long breath and looked at the sky, black and wide and full of stars that didn't care about the small, cruel things people did behind closed doors. I'd seen, well, tonight, silence was done. Fear was done. And Earl Weston's reign over my daughter's life was done. When I walked back inside, the house felt wrong, too still, too quiet, like all the walls were listening and holding their breath. Lena stood near the sink, rubbing her cheek, eyes downcast like she was trying to disappear into the tile floor. Earl sat back at the table, arms crossed, jaw clenched in that smug way men get when they think they've handled their woman. And his mother? Janice sat there with her lips pursed and her chin lifted like she was waiting for me to apologize for interrupting her evening. I didn't speak. Not yet. I just crossed the kitchen toward Lena. She flinched when I got close. My heart cracked, but I kept my voice steady. Sweetheart, I whispered, lifting her chin just a bit with 2 fingers so she'd meet my eyes. You okay, stand-in? She nodded, small and shaky. Her voice came out soft. Mama, it's fine. He just got upset, that's all. I shouldn't have. Stop. I said it gentle, but final. Don't finish that sentence. Behind me, I heard Earl scoff, footsteps pushing back his chair. You don't talk to her like she's a child, Evie. She's my wife, and she knows how to behave. That's all this is. I turned my head real slow to look at him. His face changed a little when he saw my expression. Not enough to show fear, but enough to tell he felt something. Maybe confusion, maybe surprise, maybe just a prickle of discomfort. Good. Janice clicked her tongue. Earl's right. Lena needs structure, discipline. She's lucky to have a husband willing to keep her in line. Most men these days are too soft. I didn't reply to her either, because the truth is, folks like her don't deserve conversation. They deserve consequences. I took Lena's hand, warm, trembling, and gave it a faint squeeze. Go pack a bag, I told her quietly. Just a small one, what you need for tonight. Her eyes widened, breath catching. Mama, he won't let me leave. Earl stepped closer, shoulders puffing. She's not going anywhere. You don't get to walk in here and... I raised my hand, just a tiny bit, and he stopped talking. Not because he respected me. No. Because something in my face, something old and buried from years of ER nights. Years of dragging the injured away from the ones who hurt them. Something in me told him he should back up. Lena slipped down the hall, toward her bedroom, quiet as a mouse. Earl watched her go, jaw twitching, like he was calculating how far he could push me. His mother sat stiff as a fence post, her eyes narrowing, like she was preparing a lecture she'd deliver in the morning. But here's the thing about people who think they're in control. They never expect anyone to call their bluff. I stepped toward the table again, hands resting lightly on the back of the nearest chair. Calm, controlled, my heartbeat steady, like a drum that's been beaten for decades. You put your hands on my daughter again, I said softly, and the next person that touches you will not be so gentle. Earl barked a laugh, too loud, too forced. You think you can threaten me in my own house? I'm not threatening you, Earl. I looked him dead in the eyes. I'm warning you. He took a step forward, shoulders stiff. You're not taking my wife. She was never yours, I said. He opened his mouth to speak again. Yell, maybe. But headlights suddenly cut across the living room window. Two long beams sweeping over the walls, stopping right on us. Earl looked over his shoulder, confused. Janice frowned. But me? I knew that car, knew those lights, knew that timing. I didn't smile, but I felt something settle inside me. My backup had arrived, and Earl Weston had just run out of time. The sound of those headlights sliding over the living room wall didn't just break the tension, it sliced it clean. Earl and his mother both froze like someone hit pause on them. But inside me, everything clicked into place. That quiet, steady part of my soul, the one that only wakes up when things get real dangerous, whispered, All right, Evie, it's time. Earl stepped toward the window, squinting like he expected a sheriff's cruiser or a neighbor dropping by. But that was no sheriff and no neighbor. The engine cut off, the driver's door opened, and I heard that familiar thud-thud of boots hitting the ground. Heavy, purposeful. Boots that never approached a house unless the reason mattered. Janice's lips puckered. Who on earth is that at this hour? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Instead, I walked to the front door and opened it before Earl could get any bright ideas. There he stood, Caleb Rowe. Tall, broad shoulders, gray in his beard, eyes like someone who'd stared down danger enough times to recognize it in the dark. We'd known each other since high school. He'd gone military, then federal work, then private security jobs nobody asked too many questions about. We'd reconnected after my husband died, but life had a way of drifting us apart. Still, there are some people you can call after 8 years of silence, and they'll show up like you spoke yesterday. "Evening, Evie," he said, stepping into the doorway. "Caleb," I murmured, keeping my voice leveled. "Appreciate you coming by." His eyes scanned my face, then passed me into the living room. "What happened?" "Inside," I said quietly. He didn't push for details. Caleb never did. He walked in slow, but with the kind of presence that filled a room whether he spoke or stayed silent. Earl straightened up like a rooster realizing someone bigger just stepped into the barnyard. "Who the hell is this?" Caleb didn't answer at first. He took in the scene. Lena's half-packed bag sitting by the hallway, her red cheek. Janice's pinched expression, Earl's clenched fists, his jaw ticked once. Not much, but enough for me to know he'd already pieced together more than they wanted anyone to notice. Finally, Caleb spoke. "Name's Caleb. I'm here for Evie." Earl barked a laugh. "Here for her? This is my house, old man. You don't just walk in here like you." Caleb cut him off without raising his voice. "You touch her daughter?" The room went dead still. Earl's face reddened. "That's none of your damn business." "That's a yes," Caleb said calmly. Janice leaned forward in her chair, pearls rattling. "Now listen here." "No, ma'am," Caleb said, his voice still calm, but firm enough to stop her cold. "You can stay quiet." I almost wanted to smile. Almost. Lena emerged from the hallway then, her small bag clutched to her chest like a shield. She stopped short when she saw Caleb, her eyes darting between us. "Sweetheart," I said gently, "he's a friend. You're all right." She nodded, though her hands trembled harder. Earl moved toward her. "Lena, put that bag down. You're not leaving. You hear me? You are not walking out that door." Caleb stepped between them so smoothly, it looked like the air pushed him there. "You're done talking to her," he said. Earl's nostrils flared. "She's my wife." Caleb tilted his head. And the silence that followed was heavy enough to crush glass. Janice stood now, fists tight at her sides. "This is outrageous. Evelyn, you're meddling where you shouldn't. Lena belongs with her husband. A woman needs structure." I turned to her, voice low. "Janice, the only thing Lena needs is safety." Caleb stepped back, just enough to give Lena space. But Caleb had served in situations that made men like Earl look like toddlers throwing tantrums. He caught Earl by the front of his shirt mid-air, slammed him against the wall, and pinned him with one arm like he weighed no more than a sack of flour. Janice gasped so loud it echoed off the cabinets. Caleb leaned in, voice quiet enough that only the three of us heard. "You lay hands on her again," he said, each word measured, "and you'll pray the police find you before I do." Earl tried to shove him off, but Caleb didn't budge, not an inch. I walked past them, took Lena's hand again, and guided her toward the door. My girl was shaking so bad her knees nearly buckled, but she kept moving. That's the thing about survival. Sometimes it's not brave. Sometimes it's just desperate enough to walk, even when your legs feel like water. We stepped onto the porch, night wind brushing against us. I held her close, her small frame leaning into mine like she'd been holding her breath for a while. Behind us, inside the house, Caleb finally released Earl. The sound of him hitting the floor wasn't loud, but it sure was satisfying. Janice let out a choked cry. the kind people make when they're shocked their power didn't work. Caleb came out a heartbeat later, closing the door behind him like he'd just wrapped up a casual visit. "You two go ahead," he said softly. "I'll follow behind." I nodded once. "Thank you." He gave a short nod back. Nothing dramatic, nothing warm. Just steady, reliable. I walked Lena to my car, helped her inside, and buckled her in like she was 6 years old again. Her eyes were glassy, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mama, what's gonna happen now?" I brushed her hair behind her ear. "Now?" I closed her door gently. "Now we start taking our lives back." Dot. But deep inside, I already knew this wasn't over. Men like Earl don't let go easy. Women like Janice don't back down quietly. And the storm they were about to unleash, they didn't realize I'd weathered storms far worse and come out angrier every time. The drive back to my house felt longer than it should have. Maybe because Lena sat beside me in the passenger seat like she was made of thin paper, fragile, folded too many times, holding herself together in ways no one her age should ever have to. She stared out the window, her cheeks still swollen, her fingers twisted together so tight the knuckles were white. I kept glancing over at her, making sure she was still breathing steady. The streetlights flickered across her face, and every now and then her eyes would wince just a little, not from pain, but from memories she was trying to push down, but couldn't. When I pulled into my driveway, she didn't move at first, just sat there, seatbelt still clipped, chest rising and falling slow and uneven. "Sweetheart," I said softly, "we're home." Her lips parted like she wanted to answer, but no sound came out. Instead, she nodded once. I got out, walked to her side, and opened the door. She stepped out on shaky legs, and I wrapped an arm around her waist, leading her inside the house that had sheltered her for 18 years. My home smelled like lavender and old wood, familiar, safe. I wanted that smell to wrap around her and tell her she was done hurting. She sat on the couch, hands still in her lap, eyes staring at the floor like she was afraid the carpet might judge her too. I knelt in front of her, lifted her chin gently. "Lena, look at me." She tried. She really did, but her eyes kept sliding back down. "Sweetheart, none of this is your fault. Not a single piece of it." Her lips trembled. "Mama, I should have left before. I should have—" "Stop right there." My voice was soft but firm. "You survived. That's what matters." A tear slid down her cheek. She swiped it away quick, embarrassed. That broke my heart even more. The fact she still thought she had to hide her pain. I stood, walked to the kitchen, filled a cup with water, brought it back, and set it on the table next to her. "You drink a little, then go wash up. You'll feel better once you're cleaned and settled." She nodded again, took the cup, and sipped like her throat hurt. Maybe it did. Maybe everything hurt. She disappeared down the hallway toward the bathroom, walking like she didn't trust the floor not to give out. As soon as she was out of sight, I exhaled slow, the kind of exhale you let out when you're standing on the edge of a cliff and trying not to fall. I walked to the front door, cracked it open, and stepped onto the porch. Caleb's truck sat at the end of the driveway, headlights off, engine quiet. He leaned against the front bumper, arms crossed, watching the street like he was guarding the whole neighborhood. I walked down the steps toward him. "You didn't need to stay," I said. He shrugged. Didn't feel right leaving yet. Thank you. He nodded, eyes never leaving the dark road. He gonna come? He will, I said. Men like Earl don't like losing control. He's not getting near her, Caleb said flatly. I'll make damn sure. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. The night hummed with crickets. The wind pushed the trees slow, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Then Caleb asked, "How long's it been going on?" I looked at my hands. Too long, and she hid it well. She's scared, but she's strong. He paused. She gets that from you. I didn't answer. Couldn't. Words felt stuck in my throat, heavy and sharp. Caleb shifted his weight. Evie, you know this is gonna escalate. I know, and you know he's not gonna take it quiet. I know that too. He turned to look at me finally. You want my help through all this? I met his eyes. I wouldn't have called you if I didn't. He nodded, simple and sure. Then I'm in. It should have comforted me more than it did, having a man like Caleb on our side. A man who knew how to handle danger, who'd lived through darker things than Earl Weston could even imagine. But trouble has a way of spreading. And once it starts, you can't always control where the fire goes. Before I could say more, the porch light behind me flicked on. It was automatic, motion sensed, but the timing made my spine stiffen. Caleb straightened. Someone's out back? No, I said, probably just, but I didn't finish, because the second I turned toward the house, I heard Lena scream. Not a small scream, not a startled squeak. A real one. Raw, terrified. The kind that rips out of your chest when danger's already touching you. I bolted toward the house, heart jackhammering, legs carrying me faster than they had in years. Caleb was right behind me. I threw open the door so hard it slammed against the wall. "Lena!" I yelled. Her scream cut off suddenly, choked like someone covered her mouth. I raced down the hallway, Caleb close behind, and when I reached her bedroom doorway, I stopped dead. Not because I froze, but because fury held me still for a split second. Lena stood against the far wall, trembling violently, her face drenched in tears. And in the open window, the window she'd cracked earlier for air, stood a shadowed figure. Large, familiar, breathing hard. Earl. He'd climbed right into my house. And the look he gave me wasn't angry anymore. It was unhinged, wild, like a man who'd lost everything and decided to take back whatever he thought belonged to him. Caleb reached forward, but Earl snarled, actually snarled, like an animal cornered. "This," Earl hissed, pointing at Lena, "isn't over. She's mine." Lena whimpered, "Mama." I stepped toward him, slow, controlled, my voice low enough to scare the air itself. "No, Earl, not anymore." But before I could close the space between us, he lunged again, not at me, at her, at my daughter. And that moment, that split second, ignited something inside me I hadn't felt in years, something Earl should have prayed he never woke. I spent the whole night sitting in that creaky old rocker of mine, the one that's been in my living room longer than some folks in this town have been alive. It groaned under me every time I shifted, but I didn't care. Sleep wasn't visiting that night, and even if it tried, I wouldn't have opened the door. My mind wasn't ready for rest. My heart sure wasn't either. Caleb's voice kept floating back to me, thin and tight, like a string pulled so hard it could snap if you touched it wrong. I've heard that kind of tone from him only twice in his whole life. Once when he broke his arm, falling from old Mr. Tanner's barn roof, and once when he told me his father wasn't coming home from the hospital. That night made it the third. You don't forget a child's trembling. Not even when they grow taller than you and pretend they can handle the world without blinking. Mothers remember the smallest cracks. We hear the sound of a soul trying its best not to fall apart. And when Caleb confessed what he'd been hiding, it wasn't just the words that hurt. It was the way he said them, like he'd been carrying a weight too heavy for one person. I stared out the window, watching the dark stretch across the neighborhood. Houses went quiet. Porch lights blinked off, one by one, and the whole world seemed to exhale into a silence that didn't feel peaceful at all. It felt staged, like the quiet before a gunshot, like the air holding its breath, waiting for someone to decide which way the night would go. I kept thinking about signs I'd ignored. How many times had Caleb come home later than usual? How many forced smiles had I brushed aside, calling it life, or stress, or just tired? How many times had he excused himself to answer a message, shoulders stiff, jaw tight, trying real hard to look normal, but failing in the ways only a mother can see? I told myself not to overthink, not to pry. I'd promised him I wouldn't hover the way I used to when he was small. But there's a difference between giving your child space and letting danger walk right up to your front porch. And somewhere along the line, danger had gotten a chair at his table, and I knew exactly who brought it. A face I never trusted, one with someone who liked control more than kindness, someone who believed raising a hand was the same as teaching a lesson. Every time I replayed the dinner in my mind, I felt that same burn creep up my neck, that same freeze in my chest when I heard what had happened. But knowing the truth behind it, knowing it went deeper than a single night, that sank into me like a stone dropped down a well. I folded my hands and leaned forward, elbows pressing into my knees, staring at the floor like it might give me answers. The house felt too small for the anger rising in me. My breath came slow but steady, the kind of steady that comes when you're making a decision you know you won't back away from. "All right," I whispered to the empty room, though it didn't feel empty anymore. If they wanted trouble, they picked the wrong family. Because here's the thing about mothers like me. We don't go looking for fights. We don't start storms. But when someone hurts our children, we don't walk away. We don't stay quiet. We don't let the people who think they're untouchable walk around believing they still are. The hours crawled by. The night thinned out. A few cars passed down the road. The streetlights flickered once, and the first hint of dawn slid across the horizon like a blade of pale gold. I heard the birds waking up, rustling in the trees, unaware that a storm was brewing right behind the sunrise. I pushed myself out of the rocker, feeling the stiffness in my joints, but there was something else inside me too, something steady, something sharper than fear. Resolve, the kind you only feel when you know you're doing what must be done. I went to the kitchen, washed my face, tied my hair back, and slipped on my coat. The long brown one, with deep pockets and a weight that makes me stand a little straighter. I looked at myself in the mirror by the door. 59 years staring back at me. Wrinkles, yes. Tired eyes, sure. But something stronger behind them than there had been in a long, long time. With my keys in hand, I opened the door and felt the morning air hit me, cool and dry. The sun hadn't fully climbed up yet, just enough to paint the street in a soft glow. I stepped out onto the porch, closed the door behind me, and took a breath that felt heavier than the entire night combined. I wasn't heading out for coffee. I wasn't going for a walk. I wasn't visiting a neighbor. I was going to the one house I should have gone to a long time ago. And this time, I wasn't arriving as someone's mother-in-law, someone's neighbor, or someone trying to keep the peace. I was arriving as Maggie Lee, the woman who doesn't let anyone, and I mean anyone, lay a hand on her child and walk away smiling. And by the time the sun climbed fully over the rooftops, someone in that house was going to wish they'd never underestimated me. I walked down that driveway with steps slow enough to look calm, but steady enough to show I wasn't turning back. Not today. Not ever again. The morning air carried that crisp bite November likes to sneak into your bones, but it only sharpened me, made every breath feel like a reminder of why I was out there. Not for drama, not for vengeance out of spite, but for the simple, unshakable truth that my child had been hurt in a place that should have been safe. And that wasn't something I could let sit. Their house stood at the end of the cul-de-sac, the kind of place that looks quiet on the outside but reeks of tension when you get close enough. You could feel it in the yard, the lawn too perfect, the curtains always closed too tight, the silence too thick for a home that held more than one soul. I'd been there plenty of times before, dropping off pies, making nice, waving like a polite neighbor is supposed to. I'd stood on that porch smiling, giving the benefit of the doubt, pretending I didn't see the little looks or hear the snide comments their boy made toward mine, pretending everything was peachy because Caleb loved her and I didn't want to stir the pot. Funny thing is, that pot had already been boiling. I was just too patient to notice. As I reached the steps, the front door swung open before I even lifted my hand. There she was, Cynthia. That woman had a stare like a frostbitten January morning, and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. She whooped me up and down like I'd arrived uninvited to her own funeral. "Well," she said, crossing her arms, "you're out early. Everything all right?" Her tone wasn't concern. It was annoyance wrapped up in fake politeness. The kind of voice someone uses when they think they're above you. I held her gaze, steady as stone. "Everything's just fine," I said. "I'm here to talk." Her eyebrows twitched, just a bit. She wasn't expecting calm. She wasn't expecting quiet. She was expecting a scene. The kind of screaming match she could later claim was crazy behavior. But I wasn't giving her that satisfaction. "Talk about what?" she asked, leaning against the doorframe like she owned the whole zip code. "Your son," I replied, keeping my voice low, even, "and what he thinks he's allowed to do." For a second, just one flicker of a second, something in her eyes shifted. Not guilt, not shock, just irritation. like she was tired of the topic already. "You're exaggerating," she said, waving a hand like she was shooing off dust. "Kids argue. Couples argue. She's dramatic. You know how young wives can be." I stepped forward just enough for her to straighten up, her arms loosening from their cross. "There's a world of difference," I said, "between an argument and putting hands on someone." She opened her mouth to reply, probably to spit out some excuse she rehearsed, but I kept going. "I raised my son better than to start trouble," I said, "but I also raised him not to lie. And the bruises didn't lie either." Her jaw tightened. There it was. A crack in the armor. "You need to stay out of this," she snapped. "Whatever happens between them is none of your—" "It became my business," I cut in. "The moment your boy raised his hand at my daughter-in-law, with you sitting right there, cheering him on like it was entertainment." She blinked. Slow, calculating, the way people do when the truth hits harder than they expected. "You don't know what she did," she muttered. "I don't care if she burned dinner, broke a glass, or breathed wrong," I said, voice still even. "Nobody earns a slap, and certainly not 3. Her lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't like being talked back to, not from anyone, but especially not from a woman she'd labeled as soft. That's the thing about people who rely on fear. They get real uncomfortable when it doesn't work. "You can leave," she hissed, pointing toward the sidewalk. "I could," I said, "but I won't." And then she saw it. The look in my eyes that wasn't anger, wasn't fear, just certainty. The kind of certainty that tells a person you came prepared. Her gaze flickered toward the window behind her, toward the shadows moving inside. He was awake, listening. Good. "Where is he?" I asked. "Not available," she snapped. "Oh, he's available all right," I said softly. "He just doesn't want to answer for what he did." Before she could respond, the hallway behind her shifted, and he stepped into view, tall, smug, arms crossed like he was the sheriff of the street. He smirked. Actually smirked. "Well," he said, "if it isn't the hero." I didn't flinch, didn't step back, didn't raise my voice. "Morning," I said. "We need to talk about the hands you've been throwing." He shrugged, casual as you please. "Sometimes she needs correction." I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not rage, not shock, just clarity. The clarity that comes when you look at someone and realize they're too far gone to understand right from wrong. "Correction?" I repeated. "Son, you don't correct a grown woman. You don't own her. And you sure don't put fear into someone who trusted you." He rolled his eyes. "A child in a man's body. You're not changing anything," he muttered. "She won't leave." "Oh," I said quietly. "She already did." His smirk faded. Slow. And that's when I saw it, the first crack of fear. The tiny sliver of uncertainty. The dawning realization that the person he thought he controlled was now under the protection of someone who didn't scare easy. He stepped forward, shoulders tensing, but before he could speak, before his mother could spit another excuse, before the house could swallow another ounce of truth, my phone buzzed in my pocket, right on time. And the moment I saw the screen light up, I smiled. Just a little, just enough for both of them to feel it in their bones. Because the people behind that call, they weren't here for small talk. They were here because I decided it was time someone finally held him accountable. The second that phone buzzed in my pocket, The whole house seemed to stiffen. Cynthia's face went pale first. Just a shade. Just enough for me to see she knew exactly what that call meant. Her son tried to play it cool, but even from the doorway, I could see the twitch in his jaw. His pride was loud, but his fear? Oh, sweetheart, that fear whispered loud enough for me to hear it, clear as day. I let the phone buzz twice before I answered. Not out of trauma, but out of control. Mine, not theirs. Evie, the voice on the other end said, calm, measured, familiar. You outside? Right here, I replied, keeping my eyes locked on the man who thought he could lay hands on someone and walk around like king of the county. Stay put. We're a minute out. A minute. Just 60 seconds. But the tension on that porch made it feel like the world was holding its breath. I slipped the phone back into my coat pocket, slow, deliberate. Cynthia swallowed hard, tiny and tight, like her throat had turned into a straw. Who was that? She asked, even though she already knew. People like her love to pretend ignorance right up until the consequences step into their yard. A friend, I said, and my voice stayed low, even. Someone who doesn't take kindly to folks raising hands at my blood. Her son scoffed. You think you're scaring me with your little calls? Lady, you don't know who you're messing with. Oh, sweetheart, I murmured, almost sorry for him. You're the one who underestimated the wrong mama. Before he could come back with some snide remark, the sound cut through the quiet neighborhood. 2 cars rolling slow down the street, engines low, steady, and unmistakably official. Not sirens, not noise, just presence. Cynthia's breath hitched. Her son took one involuntary step back, and those cars pulled right up to the curb like they belonged there, doors opening in near perfect unison. Now, some folks call them officers. Some call them friends of the family. I just call them what they were that morning. The people who made sure my daughter never had to flinch again. 2 stepped out first, both of them tall, calm, and carrying the kind of authority you can't fake. The third came around the back, a woman with a steady stride and eyes that didn't miss a thing. She looked at me first, gave the slightest nod, then turned her attention to the doorway. You Caleb Turner? She asked, voice firm but not raised. He straightened, trying to puff himself up. Depends who's asking. County Investigations, she replied, flipping her badge open with a practiced flick. We received a call regarding domestic violence and assault. His mother nearly choked. Assault? This is ridiculous! The officer held up a hand. Small gesture, huge impact. We'll speak with everyone, but right now, we're going to need you, she pointed at him, to step outside. I'm not! That wasn't a request. His bravado fell apart right there on that porch, like a cheap costume under a spotlight. He looked at his mother for backup, but Cynthia was frozen stiff, her eyes darting between him and the officers, like reality had just slapped her harder than he ever slapped anyone. He stepped forward slowly, hands tense at his sides. Sir, the male officer said, voice steady, don't make this difficult. I didn't do anything, he muttered. That's what the investigation is for. And then, Lord help me, he pointed at me. She's lying. She's just trying to ruin my life. One of the officers glanced my way. Ma'am, you okay? I nodded once. Calm. Solid. The kind of calm that comes when you know the storm is finally raining in the right direction. Dot. Cynthia finally snapped out of her shock, storming toward me like she was about to unleash every insult she'd been saving for years. You think you can walk in here and destroy our family? You think you can just... I didn't destroy anything, I said quietly. He did. I just stopped pretending not to see it. Her mouth opened to lash out again, but the officer stepped between us before she got the chance. Ma'am, we need you to stand back. Stand back, imagine that. The woman who cheered while her son slapped his wife, now being told to step away, like a child who couldn't be trusted. The next moments moved in slow motion, but felt sharp as needles. The officer spoke to him, asked simple questions, listened to every lie he tried to spit out, but the truth had already beaten him to the porch. And when they finally turned him around and clicked the cuffs into place, the entire street felt lighter. He didn't fight, didn't yell, didn't even look at me. Maybe because he finally realized the person he thought he could intimidate had been underestimated his whole life. As they walked him toward the car, he mumbled something under his breath. But I didn't need to hear it, because the only sound that mattered was the officer saying, "You can come give your full statement when you're ready, ma'am." I nodded again, pulled my coat tighter around my shoulders, and watched as the car door shut, ending a chapter I'd never asked for, but damn sure wasn't afraid to finish. Cynthia stood there shaking, not from cold, but from the first taste of consequences she'd ever had to swallow. She opened her mouth like she wanted to scream, but the words never came. Because there are some moments in life where silence says more than fury ever could. And as those cars drove away, I stepped off her porch, lighter than I'd felt in years. The walk back to my house felt different, like every step was letting go of a weight I'd been carrying without even realizing it. The cold morning air nipped at my cheeks, but it didn't bother me none. Not after everything that had just gone down. For the first time in months, my chest felt like it had room to breathe. My porch light was still on from the night before, flickering faintly, like it was tired too. I pushed the door open slow, careful, almost like I was entering a memory instead of my own living room. And there she was, my daughter-in-law, little Lila, sitting on the sofa with her knees tucked up to her chest, blanket wrapped around her shoulders, eyes red and swollen from crying. She looked up when she heard me come in, and for a moment, her face didn't show fear, just uncertainty. The kind you see in someone who's been told their whole life to apologize for taking up space. "Evie?" she whispered, voice small as a cracked whisper. I closed the door gently behind me and walked over, slow enough not to startle her. The girl flinched at the sound of footsteps. That alone nearly broke me. No one should flinch in their own safe place. I sat in my old recliner, leaned forward, and gave her the softest smile I could manage. "It's all right, sweetheart," I said. "It's done." She blinked, confused, like she wasn't sure she'd heard me right. What do you mean?" I held her gaze. They took him in. A tremor went through her, relief mixed with fear, like both emotions were trying to claw out at the same time. She covered her face with her hands and let out a sound I'll never forget. Not quite a sob, not quite a laugh, but something caught between survival and exhaustion. "I didn't think anyone would believe me," she whispered. "Baby," I said, voice low, steady. "I believed you the second you told me. I just regret I didn't see it sooner." She shook her head fast, tears streaming again. "No, no, you were the only one who ever noticed. Even my own mama said I probably made him mad." I felt my jaw tighten at that, tightly enough my teeth touched in a way they hadn't in years. Women like her mother. Lord help me. I'll never understand how some folks can be handed proof their child is hurtin' and still look the other way. I reached out and brushed a loose strand of hair off her cheek. "You're safe now. That's what matters." For a long moment, she just cried softly. Not the terrified, flinching kind of cry, but the tired, healing kind. Like her heart was finally letting go of something that had been squeezing it too tight. After a while, she wiped her face, sniffled, and whispered, "What's gonna happen now?" "Well," I said, leaning back in the chair, "that depends on you." She looked up at me, brows knit. "Me?" "Mm-hmm." I nodded. "You get to decide what comes next. Not him, not his mama, not anyone else. This is your life. And for the first time in a long while, you get to hold the reins." She stared into the blanket, twisting it between her fingers. "I don't even know who I am anymore." "You will," I said gently. "But first, you need rest and food and a home where nobody raises their voice at you just for breathing." Her lips trembled, and she whispered, Do you really want me here?" "Jot." I leaned forward, heart aching at the question. "Sweetheart, you're family," I said. "And not because of him, but because you're kind and gentle, and you survived things that would have broken most folks clean in half. The door to this house stays open for you, always." She burst into tears again, the soft, wordless kind that sound like a soul finally catching its breath. I let her cry as long as she needed. Some pains don't disappear with one morning's justice. They take time, warmth, patience. After a while, she whispered, "Thank you for everything." I squeezed her hand. "Don't thank me. I did what any mama worth a damn would do." We sat quiet for a while, just listening to the low hum of the old heater and the soft rustle of her blanket. The sun had just begun rising, casting a warm gold glow across the room. And for the first time since all this started, the house felt safe again. There was still a long road ahead. Paperwork, statements, healing, choices she'd have to make about the future. But none of that scared me, because she wasn't alone anymore. I stood up slowly, my knees cracking like old wood, and padded into the kitchen. "You hungry, baby?" She sniffed, wiped her eyes, and nodded, a little. "Well," I said, opening the cabinet and pulling out the cast iron skillet I only use when someone needs comfort food. "Then let's start there. Everything's easier to face after a hot breakfast." She let out a shaky half laugh. "I can help." "Nope," I said, turning on the stove. "Today you rest. Tomorrow you stand up. But today you get to just breathe." As the skillet heated and the smell of butter filled the air, I felt something settle deep in my chest. Not pride, not relief, a promise. A promise that as long as I'm still breathing, nobody, and I mean nobody, will ever lay a hand on that girl again. Bella sat there for a moment, letting the silence settle. The house finally felt calm. Not heavy, not tense, just still. She looked at the letter she had written earlier, the one that carried every truth she had swallowed for years. She folded it slowly, placed it on the kitchen counter, and exhaled like she was letting go of a whole past life. When Marcus walked in, he froze when he saw her. His face was tired, not from work, but from consequences finally catching up. "Bella, you're here?" She nodded calmly. No yelling, no tears, just steady. "I came to end this the right way," she said. Marcus tried to speak, but she lifted a hand. "This ain't about blame anymore. I'm done arguing. I'm done proving my worth. I'm done fighting for someone who should have stood beside me without being reminded." He swallowed hard, guilt settling deep. "What do you want to do?" he whispered. Bella picked up her small bag, the only thing she brought. "I'm leaving, Marcus. Not out of anger, out of peace. I'm choosing myself." For the first time, he didn't chase her words with excuses. He didn't beg. He didn't try to twist the story. He just stood there, finally realizing she meant every single thing. Bella stopped at the door and looked back one last time, not with pain, but with clarity. "You had my loyalty," she said quietly, "but you didn't know what to do with it." And with that, she stepped outside. The air felt different, lighter, warmer, like the world had been waiting for her to finally walk into her own life. She didn't run. She didn't look back. She just walked forward, steady, proud, and free. Later that night, she texted her best friend, "It's done. I'm good. Really good." And for the first time in years, she actually meant it.